Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. This is Calvin Martin. I want to thank everybody for attending today's Facilitation webinar, part 3, called Conflict Management. I think we're going to probably most likely still have a couple of folks still joining us as we begin to move through, but in order to be judicious about everyone's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just real quick to check in with everyone, we're going to be definitely utilizing today's technology somewhat. So I definitely, if you have this is your first time joining a webinar, or if you're not as familiar, we're going to be using the potential chat system and question system setups today. So please go ahead and familiarize yourself as I go through portions of this webinar. With that said, at any time if someone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand within the system or send a question out to the organizers, and we will definitely address those, or and we'll definitely at times unmute and give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions that they may have. So please feel free to let us know. That being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right into today's webinar. What I would like to do is to begin kind of reflecting back on some of the work that we've done so far. With this being the 3rd edition of the webinar, we kind of want to let's reflect a little bit back on the first 2 webinar challenges, and then to kind of set the stage for how we're going to discuss conflict management today. In the first part of the webinar, and webinar number 1 that was held in November, one of the things that we kind of talked about was, during the introduction of what exactly is facilitation, is to kind of give you guys an idea of the differences between what is a facilitator and what is a trainer. And so I kind of wanted to, I thought this was the perfect illustration that kind of highlights exactly what a consultant does versus a trainer versus a coach or versus a facilitator. And so this is something that we kind of touched on in the first session to give you all an understanding that as we, in preparation for the new curriculum, I like to think of ourselves more as a facilitator, because we may or may not necessarily be the subject matter experts on everything that's within the upcoming curriculum. And so, but we all are expert facilitators, because I like to think that we manage the information that we're given and be able to provide that information to individuals and groups through engagement, relationship building, team building, ensuring that objectives within the agenda are met. So I thought that this was the perfect illustration between subject knowledge and how that process plays out regarding a facilitator. The other difference is trying to highlight exactly during the introduction to introduce you to what a trainer versus a facilitator, the differences are. I thought that this was a great way to kind of showcase exactly what a trainer does versus what an actual facilitator does, some of the skill sets that come into play. And so because you're pretty much called upon to do a lot of different tasks, in particular engagement, which is one of the main things I think that facilitators do, and especially trying to relate the material to a multitude of different learning types. And so one of the things, obviously, you're a problem solver, you're decision makers, but you do this in a group format, and you do this through consensus building and planning. And so, which ultimately leads down to full implementation. But I think what it all really boils down to is when it comes to the relationship piece and building, by the end of your training, you have there's a natural formation of a team development and mentality that is formed. And so this is why we tend to call our volunteer trainings, this is the volunteer class. And these groups of folks tend to kind of meld, and they kind of stay together throughout their tenure with the program. And so that happens naturally in all different training types and environments. And so this is something no different than what you do on a daily basis. Now, one of the things that I also thought that was that we did within the second facilitation training webinar was we began to kind of talk about what are some of the characteristics of adult learners. And so one of the slides, or one of the things that we began to emphasize was the 6 pillars of adult learners. And one of those pillars in particular were focused on experience. Because one of the things that we talked about or discussed in the last training was specifically how do you take the information, the institutional knowledge or personal knowledge and experience within the room and allow that to assist you with the actual learning or presentation of the curriculum. And so then we kind of focus a little bit on the different training styles. Regarding experience, what I kind of did today was kind of wanted to break it down, take that experience and kind of break it down into the generations. You know, what were the impact of generations on adult learning styles? And here we talked about mature judgment, and obviously we added a little bit of an age range to kind of help make that point. Ambitious enthusiasm with the age range of 26 through 35. The sage, philosopher, philosophical, and then also the fresh ideas. These are our young, or almost our millennial-minded individuals that come through the program that may not bring the extreme life experiences of our average age volunteer, but they also bring new, wonderful ideas on how that helps us evolve not only just our training practice, but evolve our program as a whole. And so kind of wanted to show this illustration and allow you guys to take a look at this, because what I want you to do, what I'm going to ask of you all is where do you see yourself? You know, so currently as a facilitator, and so I'm going to ask you, we're going to go ahead and probably do a poll and ask a question and just ask you guys to answer in that poll, and then we'll definitely share that information with you. So with that said, I think the poll has been opened for you all to respond, which is currently in progress. So if you could go to the poll and then mark your response. Give you guys a couple more seconds to do that. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Okay, it looks like, and almost everyone has voted, and it looks like we're hanging right around. I think mature judgment it looks like it's going to fall into the being the highest, where the majority of us fall into, and I think that speaks true to the average age of the volunteers that we currently have in our base, and I think it speaks to the definitely considering what type of work experience that these volunteers bring to the table. It also, I think, brings a high level of knowledge and experience to, I think, the materials that we present. So I definitely appreciate you all participating in this poll. I thought it was a little fun little activity that we definitely wanted to kind of take you all through that. So thank you for doing that. Let's move on to the next piece. What I kind of want to do now is I kind of want to go back and take a look at, talk a little bit about the homework assignment that I provided you all last time. And so what I'm going to do is here, I just want to, I thought that the lighthouse quote here was perfect for this, because it talks about how facilitators engage certain folks despite the various behaviors, and also looks at the different types of strategies that we can use to address some of those behaviors. So definitely what I wanted to do was just briefly reflect on our homework assignment and just talk a little bit about that. And if any of you, as I'm going through this, if anybody has any kind of questions, or if there's something that came up while you were looking through this, please do not hesitate to let us know. But I'm going to quickly just go through some of this just to kind of focus on some of the information that's reflected here, because I thought that this was a perfect example of some of the things that we as trainers and facilitators encounter. So the homework counter focused on behavior, what types of attributes that the person conveying the behavior has, and then also what are some of the possible strategies to address some of those behaviors. So the first one is those participants that pretty much take over a training or are always overly engaged in the process and dominating other participants. And so it talks about some of the attributes regarding that. These are the ones that obviously kind of, and usually is those folks that may have a little bit of knowledge, and I'm saying that tongue in cheek, in experience within the community or with a particular subject that's being currently covered, whether it's an issue regarding the foster care system, whether there's an issue with cultural diversity, whether there's an issue in the community. But you're going to have someone that feels that they're a subject matter expert and going to always relay their opinion about that. Some of the strategies to address that, and really the biggest emphasis you're going to hear me do today in today's webinar is really talk about group agreements. If as a trainer or a facilitator, if you are not in the habit of establishing group agreements prior to any type of training, that is a piece that I will definitely encourage you all to do, because I think that will save you a lot of time, energy, and headaches during the course of the training piece. And so, and I think the most critical piece of it all is that you get the team, you get the group themselves to kind of police themselves through those group agreements, and plus include and have them agree upon, not only provide you what the group agreements are, but agree upon those. So you're going to hear a lot of emphasis on group agreements over the course of this hour. So next behavior is the skeptic. And these are, and obviously the one thing that kind of stands out regarding a skeptic to me was the ones that come into trainings late or leave early. And this just goes back to what type of ground rules you got established within your group agreements. Next thing was making it personal, so those participants that potentially become upset, and especially depending on the subject matter that's discussed within the training. So these are the ones where you're going to want to encourage specific feedback on. This is where you may have to, whether you got to do it a one-on-one engagement or get the group, depending on the sensitivity of the issue, get the group involved in assisting you in ensuring that the person participates. The next is a sidebar. This goes back to those that love to talk, those that talk a lot during the trainings, the gossiper, things of that nature. So there's a few tricks that I employ, and I think the strategy actually speaks to one of those, and this is why I included this piece, is because this is more about including moving yourself, making your presence kind of take care of that on its own without even really verbally engaging the person or group, So, but this is another instance where it wouldn't hurt also to directly engage the offender, for lack of a better term, and ask to see what is that you can do to make everything more amenable so that the disruption is lessened. And then the last one is the disengaged. This is a more challenging one. This is the folks that there's a reason why a person engages from a training, and we're talking about more of a disengagement where there's a concern, there's a problem, whether the person shows some type of emotion because of it or not. This is one of the things I always implore is this is where you have to do during a timeout or a break or something, do a one-on-one and find out. And naturally, 9 out of 10 times, there's always an issue that I think that can readily be resolved based on the one-on-one discussion. And so I've had to do that a few times in my career, in my training life. So that is something that I definitely feel strongly about, is you can never go wrong with a personal conversation with the person. So regarding that, I didn't know if anybody had any kind of questions or if you had any other experiences, but we're kind of going to talk a little bit more about that, relaying what type of experiences that you may have further on in the training. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump back into our presentation and go to the next one. One of the things that this is more of an introduction, because when, yes.
You did have one question. Did you want to look at it real quick?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
It was for group agreements. Is there any particular language or a list of items that you could provide us that you generally include in any pre-service or in-service training?
That's a very good question, and usually it's done. I would determine the type of training that you're having, like for instance, because that kind of sets the stage. Usually with group agreements, you want the majority of the agreements, or minimally you want the audience to feel that the majority of agreements come from them. So, but if there are certain important things that you feel that need to be part of the group agreements, you can proactively include those into the agreements. Give you an example. Case in point is, does everybody agree not to have their cell phones out, or to make sure that cell phones must be off? So that can be part of the group agreements. Does everybody agree to that everybody must be courteous and polite to everybody else within the room? So this also, that depends on personalities, things of that nature. And so those are the kind of agreements that are the ones that you can potentially use. Now, depending on the subject, like for instance, cultural diversity, so because that, depending on how deep, on the deep end, if you want to go into cultural diversity training, you can always give a group agreement of be sensitive to what others say, or allow others to speak their truth, so those are just some examples. I would never go in with written, predetermined group agreements for the audience. Those are something that they should be generated by the team itself, but you can lead that discussion. So I think that was an excellent question. All righty. Next up is when you kind of think of conflict management, if you guys were to research conflict management, one of the most popular management modalities that come out is the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode. Now, this is something that we're not going to focus on particularly today, but I thought it was important, and particularly you guys being trainers, to be aware of this. And this is something that I would definitely encourage you all, if you ever had an opportunity, or you just take about 5-15 minutes to kind of research this. You're going to see a lot of things that you probably naturally do in your trainings utilizing this mode. But I'm going to quickly just talk briefly about this. But like I said, I just want to emphasize, I just felt it important to kind of introduce you all to this piece. And what the Thomas Kilmann conflict management, what it is really a model for handling conflict. And it's organized into 5 conflict management styles, essentially based on 2 dimensions, though that is assertiveness and cooperativeness. And so, and the 5 conflict modes are accommodating, avoiding, collaborating. And with collaborating, this is pretty much the balance. This is when you try to break free of the win-lose paradigm, and you go to try to seek a win-win paradigm. And so this can be the most effective for really complex scenarios where you need to find a solution. This can also mean about where you need to probably reframe a challenge that you're having in a particular training class in order to create like bigger space and room for everybody's ideals. And so this is where you kind of want to fall at, ideally, for a win-win. The next one is competing, and this is like a win-lose approach because of where it falls. within the 2 dimensions. And then the last one, compromising. Even though it's sitting there in the middle and it has appears to be a little size, this is really a lose-lose scenario where really no one really achieves what they want in this case. But essentially, by knowing your own, what kind of default patterns you have in improving I think it's incumbent that you're aware of this, so you can also improve your own self-awareness of where you technically may fall in here, depending on what type of conflict that arises. But I think that once you are aware of what that pattern is, you can kind of pay attention to whether you are working, whether it's working for you, or whether whether you need to explore other alternatives. So, like I said, though, I definitely, this is one piece that I would encourage you all that you probably need to do a little bit more research on. How relevant is it to your work? Only to the degree to where I think that it's an enhancement piece. So it's almost like going back to Psychology 101. So everything was a foundation for us. This is another building block as part of that foundation piece. So do you need it? Is this something that you need to run out and do tomorrow? No. But I think that the awareness of it, I think, will be valuable for the team, which is why I wanted to showcase it today. All righty. Next, before I get deep into specifically conflict, how to address conflict management issues within trainings, I kind of want to talk a little bit, steer us a little bit towards conflict, utilizing the curriculum itself. So here I kind of want to begin deconstructing exactly the new curriculum, what's coming, what's new, even though I'm not going to go into any real details, but I kind of want to give you an idea what are some of the challenges that you have essentially gone through when kind of addressing or utilizing the curriculum. It's no different than what you've done in the past with with previous editions of the curriculum, but I think that I kind of want to just set the stage for what we're going to be talking about next. So with that said, one of the things that I think some of the challenges that most trainers have is the time requirement. So obviously you got a curriculum, we got 30 hours of mandated volunteer training. You have only so much time to try to take essentially a 500-page book and create a 30-hour training piece and even though all the activities, everything lines up to meet the 30-hour requirement, in practical real-time utilization, and depending on your own local needs, that can be a little bit challenging. So this is one of the struggles that I think we all recognize and that we all try to make adjustments for. So the second challenge is meeting the actual objectives of every chapter within the curriculum. And so, and really because the new curriculum is activity-based and utilizing a large volume of PowerPoints and other media, I think that will make it easier to better meet the objectives than the previous versions, curriculum versions. So I think that you guys will definitely find that very beneficial, and I think that it will make your jobs a little easier. And it kind of highlights specifically the objectives that you will meet by utilizing or going through each chapter. The other ones is making volunteers comfortable with the information and maintaining a safe environment. This is really, besides the first important thing I talked about earlier was group agreements. The second one of most importance is creating a safe environment for that volunteers feel that they will be able to speak their truth. And so I think that's where the learning begins to actually occur, because once new folks begin to get comfortable that that they're not going to feel that they're going to say something stupid or feel that they're able to talk in a way that will allow them to express themselves, express their opinion, and that they're not going to be judged or overwhelmed by it. I think that it's up to us as facilitators to ensure that obviously the first step to do that is through the group agreements, but I think that it's also part engagement, how we engage the group, and then how the group engages one another. So And that's something that we probably potentially could go through at a different time. But in maintaining a safe environment, I think, is also key. Another struggle is utilizing statistical information locally. And so, and this is something that we all do and assuredly need to do in order to bring the local voice to the material. And so at times, I think the struggle, though, is how do you match the local data with a particular activity or a particular subject matter without truly changing the essence of what the chapter or what the activity is trying to do, so and that's something that unless that an activity or a chapter specifically where you can do a complete substitution, which makes it easier, but there are times where, say, it's domestic violence, whether you bring in a outside person who has a different approach versus what the activity that's laid out. So those are some of the things that it depends on some logistics, and it also depends on how you manage that. And so I think that's another, but that's something I think that we are looking at assisting you all with as part of our redesign of the curriculum. Also is to fully utilize activities and exercises within the chapters. I think that a number of these things, depending on the setup of your circuit, I feel that the chapters and exercises are very valuable. They provide a very beneficial, I think, exercise for the volunteers. But I think that once and there are some differences between the new curriculum that's coming and what has been done before. So, but I think that will definitely assist as necessary with that across the state. The other thing, and I think this is the third important piece that I definitely want to emphasize, it's really about your own comfort level in delivering the material. And so usually when we're subject matter experts, obviously our comfort level is definitely much higher, and we definitely show a higher level ability in providing information and giving information. But when we're like, say, new trainers, and you were given the material, you put in your position, and within a week you have to facilitate a training. So that's when our own level of comfort is challenged, or our own stress levels begin to start potentially impacting. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about how we can kind of assist that, and that's really through preparation. That's really our biggest asset that we have, is to have quality preparation, and like I said, I'll briefly touch on that coming up. Before the next two things I kind of want to talk about is really two things. That's one is before. What can you do before a workshop or training, and what do you do? How do you avoid or mitigate conflict during a workshop or training? And so one of the things I'm going to focus on, I'm going to talk to you about, in essence, two things: preventions and interventions. And the first one is preventions, and how do you directly deal with that? So dealing with conflict, and this is also kind of reflective of some of the homework that I provided last month, and some of those strategies that was illustrated in the homework piece, so which kind of is applicable to the prevention and intervention side of what I'm presenting to you all right now. And so one of them is dealing with conflict immediately. One of the things that, depending on how much conflict or issues that you've ever had or experienced in trainings, it is always a good exercise when something comes up is to never let it fester. Because in particular, the second something happens, all eyes go to the facilitator. They're going to look at your reaction. They're going to see what you are going to do about it. And I think that's where taking charge of an issue truly, I think, sets the stage for a more favorable training outcome. And so one of the biggest emphasis is to always, and granted, some of us, it's easy to try to ignore it, but I think it's the need is too high to do so. But I think we need to address it fairly quickly. The other thing is being very open, so, and I think that to me, that goes back down to trainee engagement and relating to people, and that's how I think you formulate and build teams particularly within new volunteer classes. And so I think you being as a facilitator, the more passionate, the more engagement that you do, I think that opens up a more favorable outcome in meeting your training objectives at a time. So also, obviously, practicing clear communication and being clear in what that you want to accomplish, being clear in what is being asked. I have a tendency to always ask, when I ask a group, is there something that they need to understand? I have a tendency to do it twice, and I will ask them just to make sure, make a second. Does everybody understand? Let me repeat the question, or let me repeat what I'm asking of you. And so that is a habit I developed many years ago, because at times, in particular when I was first began training many years ago, you're going to have some folks in a group that may not necessarily understand exactly what your objective is. And so usually I've always mitigated that by making repeating and articulating specifically what is it that I'm asking of them. So I think the fourth most critical piece to conflict mediation is really listening, so because I think that it's no different than diffusing an aggressive person, so usually when someone's heard, that's usually when things begin to subside. And so active listening, and essentially what I did just gave you an example of the paraphrasing and clarifying expectations. I think that will go a long way for you. Other preventions goes back to practicing identifying what are different assumptions, so never, and when I say this, what this is in essence never really make an assumption. It's always ask if there's a need for you to ask the question why, then always ask for clarification. Always ask for what is it that can you expand on those thoughts. So I think that would also go a long way to, I think, group learning, and I think that's also a good approach for a facilitator to take, especially when you boomerang it back to the audience or to the group. So this is something that the second bullet point is not letting conflict get personal. Obviously, this is all about us maintaining a cool, calm, collected demeanor, and to ensure that it's never really get upset, because it's really not about the person, so if there are some type of frustrations that they're sharing regarding it's with the material or with the subject matter itself, there's always something that's driving that person, and to never take it personally. So the other thing is to always focus on what is it that you can accomplish, and see what is it that we can solve about the issue at hand. So if there's something that's near impossible, that's whether it's above your pay grade, whether it's an issue that's not relevant, appropriate, that doesn't meet the ability of you as a facilitator, that meet the ability as a group to solve. That's something that you don't need to. This is something that you can come to a consensus with the team about, or with the individual, and this is something that we need to move on from. So we can definitely give more examples of this, but I think that this is something, it doesn't happen that often, but I think that minimally you can, worst case scenario, we can always kick that can down the road and go to a higher authority, i.e. our circuit director or other higher level folk to help us address that. The other thing, the last thing on here regarding prevention is encouraging different points of view. And this goes about group engagement, and creating that safe environment will help, I think, really enhance the learning in meeting the room objectives. So not looking for blame, encouraging ownership of the problem, really, I think, goes right back down to group agreements, demonstrating respect that goes back to not taking anything personally, particularly if the issue escalates. This is something that very rarely happens. And give you an example, the closest I've ever come to this is during a community training that I facilitated, where we had a high-ranking individual from the community in there that kind of had a reputation for being very adversarial. And so the person, because we knew that prior to the person coming to the training, we took steps to de-escalate any type of issues that began to kind of take foot. And so we kind of head those things off. And the other thing is we directly engage this person throughout the training to ensure that their negative engagement patterns did not come up, which we were very successful at. But that's only because of our knowledge of this individual, and because we kind of knew the type of individual this person was. And so we're able to kind of make plans on how to assist with that. So. And also keeping team issues within the team. I think that when you have the group take ownership, this goes back to group agreements, you have better outcomes. You have better engagement and better, I think, solving abilities of issues that come up. So looking more into what goes on during a workshop, and one of the things, and it goes back to what I said before, it's really about how you are engaging the group and the individuals to ensure that they have a safe environment, that our group agreements allow us to walk together. But when you have those individuals and you're able to identify the individuals or the ones that begin to show a pattern of truly, I don't want to just say acting out, but truly are diminishing your training efforts. And those are the times where you need to kind of begin looking at ways to how to address those, whether you do one-on-one engagement, whether you bring the group itself in to assist in that. And obviously it depends on if it's curriculum or training related, but if it's something that's more personal, then I definitely encourage you to do a one-on-one training with them. Obviously, as facilitators, we don't try not to criticize folks that are not conforming, but there's always, and I have found that in most behaviors, there's always opportunities, always there's a strength to what's going on that you can allow to, whether it can turn out to be a teachable moment, or whether you can flip it to be a positive outcome, and always take into account those opportunities when they do come up. And this goes back to engaging issues early on and not allowing them to fester, so that when you do engage them, you do not have to worry about, I would say the best way to say this is contaminating others within your group. So, and I think that's the best approach to deal with that. This last bullet point here really is, the other thing is, we all have our own perception of what is good behavior and what is bad behavior. And so it's very easy for us to fall back on those notions. But in particular, what I have learned, and particularly being a trainer that travels into many different environments, so I've learned that my own perception of what is bad behavior and good behavior is not necessarily meets the community's perception or meets the local area or a separate office. And so once you kind of learn those little natural rules of the area, of the environment, you kind of can adjust and understand why a particular behavior may be happening and how to better address that. So I thought it was good to always ensure that to not put your own assumptions, make your own assumptions about what behavior is. All right. Before I go on, I just want to pause real quick, make sure if you have any, again, remind everybody, if you have any questions or even comments. We can do the chat if necessary too. If you send it to to the organizers, and or if you have a question, please send that, and then I can definitely stop and address that for you. So moving on, looking at the challenges to facilitators, we're going to look at direct and indirect challenges. Now, what I have listed here are really challenges that you all, these are excessive. These are something that I think many of us don't necessarily experience, but I kind of wanted to put them up there just in case that you do. There's only been one time in my career where I came across a very aggressive participant in a group, and thankfully I was with a training team to assist in addressing it. So but just to let you know, the final outcome is the person wasn't kicked out, but we were successful at mitigating the disruption. So, but it was definitely a huge challenge, but I think a plus of it was that because I had a team with me. So, but I kind of I felt the need to share this with you anyway, so you can kind of process this and have an idea what is it that you would do if you came across more of an adversarial person that just did not back down. So when it comes to if someone challenged you directly as a trainer or facilitator, these are some of the things that may potentially be said. The process, hey, this process is not working, or you're too directive or not directive enough. This or your style doesn't suit the group, or your or what you're trying to do to promote the activity or something is not inappropriate, or people, based on what you're telling us, too many people are getting upset. So and so what it is that this is where one is your relationship engagement really needs to be strong. So this is where you really need to begin simply asking the questions. What is it that we can do to meet and turn it back on the group? What is it we can do to meet the training objectives, which obviously in most trainings, and particularly when you go through the curriculum, it will highlight what the objectives are for every chapter. And so you can always refer right back to objectives and say, what is it that we can do as a group, as a team, to better meet these objectives? And let the group tell you how to address some of these issues. So if you had anyone in a training that does do this, I feel very strongly that they will also tell you exactly or share their belief on what is it that we can do to help improve that. So, and obviously, as a trainer or facilitator, do not allow this. Don't take this personally. Don't let it knock how you feel about yourself as a trainer or anything. That's not the issue. It's really about how do we take the group experience, that group knowledge, and allow it to better help us meet the objectives of the particular training that we're going through. So some of the indirect things that we may see. Now, these are some of the things that you will probably see minimally from at least one person in almost every training, depending on the number of people that are in the training group. So particularly those that are late to arrive back from breaks, those that you got the talkers. It goes back to the homework assignment that we talked about earlier. You rarely won't see too many people that are just outright ignore the facilitator, but sometimes it does happen. And then also, when you normally will see a group member or participant take over a role, you usually see that in an activity, a breakout activity, small group work, or something like that. So those are the things where if there's a pattern that shows up of that, some of these things that may potentially be able to be addressed in the group agreements, but some of these things that you may have to do more direct engagement. So it just really depends on the situation and how you need to, what is it that you can do to help and to respond to that. So, all righty. Responding to the challenge. One of the things goes back to becoming increasingly aware of you. Your experience, utilizing your experience, your knowledge, your belief in yourself, in taking those, once I think you become aware of something, you have the ability to better corral it. You have the ability to kind of focus it more. And so I think that once you have an understanding of who you are, really your success rate is going to be through the roof. So, and that goes back through I think when you get the curriculum for the first time and when you see the material for the first time, it can be a little overwhelming, but I think over time you begin to develop your way of teaching, your way of instruction, and I think that's where you'll be able to go about and respond to this particular challenge. So also keep in mind the difference between the goals for the class and the goal and learning objectives. And so they're not always one and the same. So particularly what the biggest influence of that is what's the need for your local area, whether retention may be a big issue in some circuits, and so retention starts from day one. And so there may be a little more emphasis in how you engage in your engagement style, how you address issues, whether you do a light hand or a heavy hand. It really depends. All that is you keep that mind. You're always mindful of that, and not only just making sure that you reach the objectives of the training itself, but you also reach the objectives for the class and ensuring that you you create not just an outstanding volunteer advocate, but someone that a CAM has the ability to also be able to actively engage, and they're going to meet the needs of the CAM themselves. So also, the last bullet point is the work to develop the volunteer's ability to reflect and use higher order thinking skills as much as possible. This goes back to generational learning styles. It goes back to kind of the activity that we did earlier. It's really experience, but it's also taking those different styles and ensuring and maximizing each style to get the best from everyone, and ensuring that I think that will also go a long way in helping you meet the curriculum objectives, and also make life a little bit easier for you all too. So also responding is create a safe environment, engaging classroom that we talked about. Also, the bullet point 2 refers to really participant engagement, connect when possible to volunteer experience, the interest, and their experience. And this is where I think it's very beneficial and valuable to utilize the experience of the room, and that's what really facilitation, that's one of the core essence of what facilitation truly is. So also use relevant exercise to engage volunteers. This is up here in case, and this is just outside of the curriculum. Even though the curriculum provides you everything you need, this also, when you're facilitating other aspects of your job, whether it's you design your own CAM training, where you design a separate volunteer training piece, this is just a reminder to always use exercises that are very relevant to what you're trying to accomplish. And also go back to the building blocks of your foundation to consider in designing a particular training piece or something. Keep how some of the efforts that are successful for you in mind. Obviously, if depending on your personality type itself, if you're very good at the group agreement design, if you're very good at facilitating agreements, if you're very good at presentation pieces, you bring all those into play in how you. And I think that will help you in setting up or challenging any kind of issues that do come up. Also, structuring training so that volunteers learn. Make sure that you create an environment that is engagement friendly, that allows participants to actively engage one another, because that's where a lot of that experience, once again, is very good at helping you reach your training objectives. And also move from lower risk to higher risk training activities. Even though the curriculum naturally does that, this goes back for you as a trainer in your own comfort level, whether you want to utilize a It talks about utilizing an activity that's a simple activity, which we kind of went over a little bit in the first training piece, particularly when you guys submitted the different activities, introduction activities early on. And so those to me are perfect examples of higher and lower risk activities. And I thought there were some really complex ones in there. They were good and they can be done. There are one or two complex ones in there, but then there are a bunch of simple ones that I thought are really fun and good engagement pieces. So, and also make sure to always receive feedback, both from individuals and from the class as a whole. So, which I definitely encourage you. That's one of the 5 things I definitely, part of the other 4 that I gave you, that always go back and have discussions with individuals in the class as a whole to get feedback, because it helps improve your own style and techniques in facilitating the next class, because we all grow. Even I've been doing this for many, many years, and I still pick up different. I still love watching other trainers work and pick up new things from them. So, all right, with that being said, your turn now. I want to know, what is it? Are there any other type of dilemmas or conflicts or disruptions that you guys can come up with, that I haven't touched on here? Whether it's an example, it can be big or small, it doesn't matter. This is something that, we can actually, and Mary Kay, I think what I want to do is kind of open up the line for this instead of sending it as a question. They can send and just have them speak if necessary. So, and we have about 9 minutes. So if you have anything that you can give an example of, we'd love to hear it.
Okay, I'm unmuting everybody as I go. Just give me 1 second. Hey, Calvin, it might be better so that we don't get the conflicting sounds. If anybody does have a comment, then I can unmute them, just them.
Sounds like a plan.
Because otherwise we'll hear that backslash.
Yeah. All right. Does anybody have any an example they want to give us or anything?
They could raise their hand or put it in the chat. Then I can unmute them.
All righty. I'll give it about 30 seconds, then we'll go ahead and go to the next slide.
Lauren, I'm going to unmute Lauren. She has a comment.
Go for it.
Lauren, can we hear you?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi everybody.
Hey, Lauren.
I was just going to say that I think you made a really good point talking about structuring like a safe environment where everyone feels comfortable talking. I know that sometimes that's a challenge that we have, especially if there's like 2 or 3 volunteers in the training that really are kind of dominating the conversation and asking a lot of questions. So I was just going to say, one of the things that I've found kind of successful in our circuit, we do an activity at the end of like pre-service training called Fears in a Hat. And that's an opportunity we usually build like 20 minutes in at the end of our training, where they're able to anonymously submit any questions that they maybe didn't feel comfortable asking like out loud. And then we go through as a training team and answer those questions together as a group, so that, everybody, if they do have any remaining questions that are kind of outstanding, that we have the opportunity to make sure that nobody's walking away confused or concerned. Yeah.
Lauren, what do you call that activity?
We call it Fears in a Hat, and we give them like all index cards, and we have like a cheesy kind of foam hat that we walk around with and have them toss it in there, and then kind of come together as a class and answer all of them between me and the best interest attorney who I teach with.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that idea, and I think when you walk around, I assume you get pretty good high participation rate, and pretty much a lot of people put different things in the hat so that you can address them at the end, and it seems like you get good feedback on that.
Yeah, normally we get some really good participation on that. I think that oftentimes it's stuff that maybe we like, after the fact, we're like, oh, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. I think the other thing that we really find a lot is if we have folks that are asking a ton of questions during the training, that oftentimes they don't feel necessarily the need to put a question in there. They say, oh, I've gotten all my questions answered. So I think it kind of helps us as a team kind of figure out training wise where we're at with the comfort level of everybody in the room, depending on who's asking what questions, so we can follow up with them.
Excellent. Lauren, that's a great example. Definitely appreciate you sharing that. I don't know if you actually have that written down, but just in case if I ever get asked, if someone says, hey, Calvin, can you ask Lauren to share that? Be prepared to. I may call you up and ask, could you summarize it real quick for everyone? It sounds pretty simple, but I think the premise behind it is sound. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
All righty. Anybody else want to share? Okay. All righty. All right. Looking at the time, we're going to go ahead and move on. All right. What we're going to do is, number one, I definitely appreciate you all participating today. Sounds like we had a good little turnout, and I definitely want to thank you all for taking your lunch time to join me today. And so what I want to do is there is a homework assignment, but this one's more pretty simple. Is pretty much I kind of want you all to kind of just think through. We just completed 3 facilitation webinars. And what I want you to kind of think on is utilizing to discuss, be prepared for the next webinar next month, which is going to be February 14th on Valentine's Day. We're going to look at kind of sharing more about what are your own thoughts about training versus facilitating. Adult learning, we're going to talk a little bit about that and what your thoughts on regarding that, and also conflict management, some of the things that we talked about today. And kind of set the stage for different examples of what is it that we can do to address a particular behavior. So I kind of want you all to kind of think that through, and then also what is it that you can do, or what is, if there's anything we can do to help you improve your own facilitation skills. So kind of think along those lines, and then we're going to have a lively discussion on that next month in February. So before we conclude, is there any other questions or comments that you would like for me to address today? All righty, and just like rock, paper, scissors, just hopefully we all can just get along and just make sure that we continue to do what we need to do in mitigating conflict. So with that said, I want to thank you all for participating in today's call. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye, everybody.